You know what's really frustrating about making these videos? The fact that I have the benefit of having access to all of these books, one right after the other, rather than having to wait a month between them, and even when I go back and reread issues in preparation for each new video, I find it so difficult to care about what is happening right now. Even taking the story as a whole up to this point, it is so difficult to get myself to care about the overarching story, or should I say stories, because we're dealing with a lot of moving parts here. At the very least, having read both parts of the story we're looking at today, I can throw up my hands and declare that at least something is happening, and it even ties in with one or two of the ongoing plot threads we're trying to follow right now. The cover at least manages to be a lot more interesting than what we had last time, showing us a war-torn battlefield with two echidnas on it, apparently locked in combat with one another, while the transparent Knuckles looks on in the background. The cover is definitely exciting and beautifully detailed, though given the context of the issue, I'm not sure how appropriate it is, since most of the action is contained within a flashback. Also, the two combatants just look a little bit unintentionally goofy, one of them looking like he's chewing on a wad of gum, while the other looks like he has a mouthful of those fake wax teeth you used to get at some houses on Halloween. Overall though, I do like it, if only because it is pretty eye-catching. We open on an unknown echidna, who I honestly thought was just Knuckles at first given his silhouette, seeming surprised to see Angel Island in the distance during his daily walk, and flies up towards it, because apparently echidnas can fly instead of glide now. I don't think it's even explained how he can do that. And lands just in time to almost be run down by Julie Sue riding a horse dragon thing around the island. Our mysterious focal character, now revealed to be wearing an outfit of patchwork rags and sporting some rather stunning black and gold eyes, immediately recognizes her as a Dark Legionnaire, and despite her rather friendly greeting to him, he decides that this is a perfect chance to make up for his mistake, and jumps her, wrestling her to the ground and eventually trying to choke her out, with her putting on a brave face and trying to goad him into actually finishing what he started. We cut away from that particularly worrying image to Knuckles meditating. He's calm, quiet, pristine, happy, in his lane, just vibing. It's around this time that Archimedes shows up again, breaking Knuckles out of his reverie, pointing out that it's been a while since the two of them have had a chance to talk about anything. Despite Archie attempting to start that catch-up, Knuckles, now revealed to have been meditating at the top of a very tall tower, decides that the obvious course of action is to jump down from it and start gliding, eyes closed, barely avoiding impaling himself and crashing a couple of times, much to the amazement of all the other echidnas watching from the ground as he touches down flawlessly. Knuckles explains that he was able to sense his flight path before taking it, and he attributes this new ability to the Guiding Star Stone he was given by Yanar back when he was down on the surface, even speculating that it was the thing that helped him get home from the Badlands. Not sure exactly how that is related, as the gem wasn't brought up at all or even shown during that sequence, but we don't spend too long wondering about that, because we immediately see that Knuckles is being spied upon by the Brotherhood, as they speculate that he's close to unlocking all the secrets of the gem. Their hidden cameras also pick up Julie Sue arriving on horseback, accompanied by the individual who was strangling her to death earlier. He must have gotten bored. Before they can ID who it is, though, the power goes out all throughout Haven, leading them to panic somewhat. Locke going down to check on the power core to find the problem, while two other Guardians, Sojourner and Tobor, are sent to make sure that the emergency power has kicked in at the medical bay, where Hawking is still in his coma, and we're shown another locked down room that Tobor says holds another patient of theirs. We're not shown exactly who it is when they go to check up on them, but they refer to her as she, and whoever it is has apparently been in this cryogenic pod for quite a while now. Sojourner doesn't seem happy about keeping her there, saying that it aligns them with an outsider's interest, though Tobor reminds him that it was done by group consensus by the Brotherhood as a whole, and they can't go against that consensus just because they might find it distasteful to their personal preferences. So the whole thing about looking out for the echidna interests and only echidna interests was a bit of a fib, wasn't it? Just add that to the secret pile. At the very least, I'll take the hypocrisy over the xenophobia. We cut back to Knuckles and friends having a nice little chat after the attempted strangling. Our mysterious visitor here is actually referring to himself as Tobor, wait a minute, former guardian of Angel Island, proving his identity by revealing that he has the same white ring around his neck that Knuckles does, apparently something that only the Guardian possesses. Julie Sue is apparently willing to vouch for him telling the truth. I guess he took time to tell her his life story while choking the life out of her. Seriously, when exactly did he decide not to kill her? And Knuckles is immediately curious to hear what he has to say. Tobor very quick to launch into a flashback where we see that the tradition of parental abandonment was a lot more casual way back when. Tobor was made a guardian as his father was leading for an indeterminate amount of time, going off to fix up the floating island after the dingoes, and the echidnas, but we're not going to mention their part in messing up the island, completely wrecked it. He says a quick goodbye to his family and then just leaves, leaving his son in charge. However, not long after he takes up the position, Tobor is faced with an invasion from the Dark Legion, invading from the other universe where they were imprisoned. The invasion was led by one Moratori Rex, who prompts the gathered echidnas to reclaim their birthrights and technology, even pointing out that they had sort of started doing that already, using basic tech in their daily lives. Tobor states that they aren't about to take up something they've renounced, and won't stand for having someone else's views forced upon them. At this point, I hope it's clear to everyone that their views on technology are basically just a backdoor for them taking over the whole of Echidna society. So the two sides clash, and despite the militant, technologically augmented fascists arriving armed for a fight with tanks and advanced tech and weaponry, they get their asses handed to them by people who renounce technology, are primarily using farming and gardening tools, and definitely don't seem to be prepared for an all-out brawl. Yeah, I know that the fight scene primarily focuses on Moratori and Tobor definitely has the upper hand here, but what little glimpses we get at other parts of the battlefield make it seem like the good Echidna had the Legion outmatched from the get-go. At the very least, it's clear from this flashback that Moratori Rex isn't any match for Tobor in a one-on-one encounter. Moratori, just on the cusp of defeat, however, activates the device he used to open up the dimensional rift, teleporting them to some old ruins somewhere on the floating islands, which collapse and crush both of them, though Tobor somehow managed to survive, though he couldn't move or speak, and had no idea on the amount of time that passed before someone started digging through the rubble. As it happens, his father was the one who was searching for him, only to find Moratori's body and mistake it for him. Not really sure how his father mistakes someone else for him, considering one of them was allegedly heavily augmented, and even had some telltale signs of augmentation, particularly around the eyes, but knowing what I know about the next part of the story, I'm willing to overlook that particular fact, at least for now. Ignoring his heartache, Tobor manages to pull himself out of the rubble, but rather than return home, he just wandered off in shame until he rediscovered the floating island? So wait, he wasn't transported onto the ruins of the island, or he left and then came back? It's not entirely made clear. Back in the present, Tobor states that all he really wants now is his life and family back, despite all of the time that has passed, almost having a breakdown as he finishes recounting his story. Knuckles, in a rather nice moment of empathy, hugs Tobor and tells him to consider him family. After all, Tobor is his ancestor going by the Guardian line, and they both have a lot of questions that they want answered. It's genuinely a touching emotional moment that manages to feel earned despite just having met Tobor. Well, Tobor in quotes, as you can probably guess now, we're dealing with a doppelganger situation here. We cut away from this legitimately good scene to the Guardians, briefly, to be shown that Lox found what was causing the power outage, a fried circuit. However, they don't believe it's going to be easy to replace, since the circuit itself is an original, probably something outdated the way that cathode ray tubes are today. Locke even suggests that they might have to recreate one from scratch, and with that quick notion we cut back to Knuckles visiting the local police department with the intention of visiting an old foe to get some answers. And so our comic ends with him entering the cell of Kragok, intent on having a nice, long conversation with his distant cousin. This issue was actually fairly decent. I can at least give it credit for both letting things happen and also seemingly moving a couple of plots forward. It gives us a little bit of intrigue introducing two characters with the same name, one clearly impersonating the other. We're finally getting back into the Dark Legion stuff again, and it even manages to have a bit of emotional resonance with the introduction of Tobor and his flashback. My one gripe with this introduction was that while it is relating back to Knuckles and his struggle to find answers from his family somewhat, it's once again putting a new character in the spotlight over Knuckles rather than allowing him to be the star of his own comic. But the fact that the entire comic had the decency to follow a single topic for the most part, with only a couple of very brief detours, does give it a relatively focused feel, rather than past issues that have attempted to balance upwards of 3 or even 4 stories all at once. The narration can get kind of hammy, and again, I'm not fond of being told how a character is feeling rather than having it shown to me, like what happens when Tobor sees someone else being carried off by his father. I feel like the artwork would have done a fine enough job conveying his despair or his shame, rather than having him explain it point blank. I do understand that it's due to this being a flashback, and it's conveying a lot of information very quickly, but in this one instance, I do maintain that moments like this are always strongest when things get quiet, and we're allowed to infer what the characters are feeling from how they look on the page. It's still a pretty good moment, though. And hey, with Kragok back in the limelight, it looks like the story is finally ready to push forward in some way, shape, or form, so yay for that. In terms of art, I do think that this is a pretty good issue. Unlike the last few issues where the facial expressions didn't seem to align with the dialogue, it's much better handled here. As I already pointed out, there are some fairly strong emotions presented in proper context from various characters, and while it can sometimes be drowned out by the narration and some of the hammier dialogue, I do feel like it's represented well here, especially Tobor and his feelings of shame and regret, as well as his breakdown near the end of the story. I do also have to say, the art team is getting pretty creative with the mouth shapes in this issue too. Kragok's little bent mouth here is so funny to me, and I'm not sure why. We'll be continuing with this story and seeing just what sort of answers Ken is willing to give us when we hop into Knuckles the Echidna, issue 18. Please, Ken, I'm begging you, give us some answers, move the story forward. I don't know how much more of this I can take. I'll see you next time, everyone.